What's up, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Becoming the 1% podcast. My guest today is Kayleigh Kozak. Today we talk about trauma. We talk about, oh man, some heavy stuffs. We talk about pedophilia. We talk about child sex trafficking, sex offenders, and what she has done to change this and what she is currently doing through her legislation. Kayleigh's law, something that very much impacted Arizona, several other states, including Texas, and what she's doing to get this in all 50 states. Enjoy. So you mentioned your law being passed and everything. Let's just sort of transition into that. What is Kayleigh's law?
Go right into the deep stuff.
I
love
it.
it. I hate surface level. Let's get into it. So Kayleigh's law gives victims and survivors of sexual and domestic abuse natural life protection from their abuser.
Mm-hmm. How?
So it's basically the same as an injunction or injunction against harassment or a restraining order, but it is valid for an entire life. And so, believe it or not, prior to this law, there was no such type of protection that existed. Mm-hmm. A victim would have to prove that they were in danger after their person had been convicted and let off probation in order to get a restraining order. That's only valid for 6 months. Mm-hmm. An injunction's only valid for a year. So they would have to keep proving themselves every year to get some kind of protection.
Oh my gosh.
And so I said, that's bullshit. Victims endure so much. The last thing they should ever worry about is that they're going to lose protection from the person who abused them. And so this law, they serve the defendant now at the time of sentencing, and it is valid for their natural life. And we had terminology in politics is so fun, you guys. I fucking hate it, but I'm so good at it. We had to include natural to lifetime because in Arizona, the term lifetime is a complete joke. It actually has no definition or no meaning.
So we can lifetime doesn't have a meaning?
No.
What does it mean in a political tense?
It means nothing. It means as long as they want to say it is. It's more of a juvenile lifetime definition than anything.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
the correct terminology would be then, instead of lifetime, it would be
natural life.
Natural life?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in 2021, we drafted the original law, and we created an entirely new law. So we knew there'd be some hiccups, but we just did lifetime protection. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, well, a victim has to petition the court every year for protection. And I was like, don't even put any more time into this. This defeats the entire purpose of this law. It's supposed to be valid for their entire life, not every year. And so a perpetrator's probation status ends and then a victim's probation period starts because every year they have to set their alarm to file for an injunction? No. Mm-hmm. So we redrafted the bill and put natural lifetime in there. So what I learned was we closed the loophole that existed. And oh my God, people came out of the woodworks like you would not believe to oppose this bill because natural lifetime is a hefty sentence.
So this is statewide or nationwide?
This is statewide. So Arizona was the first state in the nation to pass Kayleigh's law in 2021.
How many states have subsequently done it?
Wisconsin was the second. It passed in 2022. This last legislative session, we drafted in Missouri and Texas. Missouri was so far down on the list that even if we would have gotten it in for session, it would have never made it through. So we pulled it and we're redrafting next session, which I was more comfortable with because I'd rather put it in the earlier bills than the later ones just to give it a better chance. In Texas, it didn't make it through the legislative process this year, but they're every 2 years. So we'll revisit in 2 years. But next session, we're drafting in California, Tennessee, Ohio, Missouri, and hopefully Virginia. Mm-hmm. So the goal is to get Kayleigh's law passed across the entire nation because protecting two states or having this protection in 2 states is not enough because victims matter everywhere. They don't just matter in 2 states.
Sure. You mentioned opposition to this arising in certain state legislations. What do those voices say? I mean, what is the concern? This seems like a pretty bipartisan issue. Should be agreed. What's their concern?
Oh, well, in case you didn't know, sex offenders make mistakes, not choices, according to them. They made a mistake. No, they made a fucking choice, an intentional, conscious choice. They got caught. And so the people come in and they're coddled. Oh, they made a mistake. It was one time. No, it's never just one time. I mean, we all know that. But it's the people in opposition are usually defense attorneys, sex offender mommies. There's an entire group that comes. They're with Arizonans for
sex offender, like the mothers of sexual offenders.
Yes.
Oh God.
Yes. They come. They're part of a group called Arizonans for Rational Sex Offender Laws. And it's funny, they always only tell part of the story. Like, for example, I just shared on my Instagram, I think 2 days ago, a mom, one of the main moms that comes down and fights for her son. And she portrays the story as, my son was in college and his victim was in high school. When I say that, what would you think?
Statutory rape? Yeah.
Like 1917, 1916, maybe
Yeah,
2016. Sure. Yeah, no, right
like
here.
14
My son was in college. He had sex with a young high school girl. He was facing 110 years. She said it happened one time. 11 counts of dangerous crime against a child. Now watch. They asked how old her son and the individual were how old they were.
Son was 25. The individual was 14. Ooh. So he was 25 in college, which says something right there. And he's interacting with a 14-year-old, which says even more.
Yep.
But again, I feel like I'm still a bit confused. I mean, playing the devil's advocate, let's say it was a mistake. So they want the right to go, he wants the right to go back and now interact with that 14-year-old after he's gone to prison. I just don't understand, like, what.
Well, I don't know what
are they fighting for?
Well, because it wasn't intentional. And she even says in her testimony that the 14-year-old initiated it. It doesn't matter if the 14-year-old initiated it. 25-year-old, a healthy, sane 25-year-old would say, like, absolutely not. Set a boundary, right?
Right.
But the way they portray it, like I said, she says, my son was in college and his victim was in high school. So you think young,
sure.
Romeo and Juliet. And we have laws for that. And we should. And every situation is different. But they go down there. No, her son had umpteen amount of charges. Like she said, he was facing 110 years in prison. That's not a light act that happened, you know?
I was gonna say, that's not from one interaction with one. You don't get 110 years.
And because these people are always around, we know a little bit more about them. And he was living with his friend and it was his sister. So he was very aware of what was going on. But these people come down and they oppose the bills and they fight it when the grounds that they stand on is, like I said, they'll only give half the story. And what's funny is the legislator that asked that question, that's what he thought was happening. He thought they were going to say, oh, no, he was 19 and she was 16, 17.
Sure, yeah.
That's not at all what happened.
No.
It backfired. And I knew and he said, oh, well, my friend was at a club and he had an incident and the girl had a fake ID and she was underage. And those things do happen. They're not, and this is where it's so frustrating in this area. Those things do happen. Those, underage girls that have fake IDs or the girls that lie. I'm not discounting those. Sure. But that is such a small portion of what's really going on.
Right.
People want to turn a blind eye to the things that are happening right before us. And focus on those things because those are the things that unfortunately blow up in the press, right? Like we don't see all the other things that are happening that are more common. And so they come down and they oppose, and then the defense attorneys and they stand on, like I said, natural life is really hefty. This is unfair. No, it's not.
Again, let's use that situation, the scenario you painted about the 16-year-old with the fake ID. If I'm 21 and a 16-year-old says she's 19, fakes it, and gets me in trouble, now I have to go to court. So according to your law, I can no longer go near that 16-year-old for the rest of my natural life. Why in the world am I going to now go to a congressional hearing and want that? Like, no, I want to be able to go near the chick with the fake, like that's so odd. A normal rational person would be like, it was a mistake, whatever. I don't need to go anywhere near that person ever again. Exactly. I don't want to go near that person ever again.
And what's so crazy is, so here in Arizona, every third Friday of the month is Sex Offender Release Day. This Friday, folks, is Sex Offender Release Day.
What's sex offender?
It's a thing. So sex offenders get to petition the court to have the terms of their probation modified or lifted. And so what's happening is, like in my case, my guy was facing 25 years in prison. My parents accepted a plea deal to try to spare me any more trauma because of everything that I went through.
How old were you?
I was 12 and 13.
Oh my goodness. How old was he?
I was in 6th and 7th grade. He was 30 and 31. He was my PE teacher and my soccer coach.
Wow.
And my club soccer coach. Yeah. And the only reason it stopped was because I switched schools and I switched soccer teams because he didn't have access to me anymore. Sure. And then 8th grade was I just kind of kept to myself. And I didn't realize it, but I was so shut out from everyone, but it's because my reality was different than every 12 and 13-year-old's reality. I was literally surviving, and I was being molested so many days. I mean, I can't make people understand that this saw him at school every day, and then I saw him at soccer, and then on the weekends, and like my mom worked
He was
with
your
him.
coach. It wasn't just in one class.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. And so like I couldn't escape him until I was able to. But when I turned him in, I went to Xavier, and I was a freshman.
Oh, no kidding.
And we were watching a video, and it was actually about grooming, but that was not a term then. And I remember sitting there and thinking like, oh God, everything they're saying happened to me. But he said it was different. He knew it was wrong, but he cared about me. And I was so good at soccer, you guys. I was recruited for an Olympic development team. Like that was my dream, was to be the next Mia Hamm. Like when I was in California, when I was in 7th grade, I was recruited by the Olympic development team, the West Coast team.
Oh, that's cool.
It was so cool. And like, he was the first one to step up and say like, yeah, I'll train her, whatever. And my parents are so just thrilled about it. And I was too, because that was my dream. And he took all that from me. I mean, he stole my innocence. He stole my dreams, And when I turned him in, we did a confrontation call, and he admitted to everything. And so they arrested him the next day. And even after that phone call was released in the courts, the soccer team, the club, the community, they still stood by his side. So the week I turned him in, we had a soccer tournament in Tucson, and we went down and we pulled up, and the entire club was wearing shirts that said, "We support our coach." And my parents were like, "We need to leave." And I didn't want to leave. I just wanted to play soccer. Like that was my only thing that I ever wanted. And that's all I wanted to do. Yeah. And my parents were so good about letting me stay and play. And I stayed for a little bit, but then the owner of the club bailed him out of jail, posted his bond, and housed him, which if you're the owner of a children's organization, you shouldn't be doing that, especially after hearing the phone call of him admitting to everything. And then the club just like stood with him, and it was a lot. So and then they hired a private investigator, and they called me out in front of the entire club. So my parents were like, "You're done. You're never going back." And that was it. And I lost, on top of everything, like the stress of being 14 and turning him in, I lost everything that I loved, which was my soccer team and my family, that part of my family that we had created, that was our life. And it was really traumatic. So my parents accepted a plea deal on my behalf. The prosecutor presented it as really good. Instead of serving 25 years in prison, if he would have been convicted of all the counts, which he probably would have because he admitted to everything on the phone, they accepted a plea deal that consisted of 6 months in jail, so he never even went to prison, and 2 terms of lifetime probation. And so my parents, they found comfort in knowing that, he'll suffer for his entire lifetime on probation. And then in 2020, I got a phone call from the Arizona Adult Probation Department informing me that he's completed his treatment and he's been good. Therefore, he's eligible to have his so-called lifetime probation lifted. And I had 3 weeks to process what that meant. And as a victim, I have rights. And so I could do nothing. I could write a letter or I could go. And I was like all over the place. I'm going. I deserve to be heard. I'm not going. He doesn't deserve any more of my time. But I ultimately ended up deciding to go to court and let my voice be heard.
And at this time you were 14?
No, this was in 2020.
Oh, so this was much later.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, when my case closed, it closed. We never talked about it, and my life just kind of went on, and we can talk about that too. But yeah, it was 15 years after I turned him in that I had to reface him in court because he wanted his probation lifted. And they were going to let him off. They said they had no opposition. It was at the discretion of the court. Come to find out, he'd been violating his probation. I can't even tell you how many times. And all this stuff came out.
What were some of the terms of his probation? What does a sex offender like that get as a lifetime probation? What can he not do?
So it just depends on the offender. It's different. This is a very complex topic. But like one of his probation terms is he can't drink. Like, I don't care if he drink, like right now, in my life, like I don't care if he drinks, that's not on me, but like he shouldn't have access to me. And at that time, that's what I said to the judge. So if you lift his probation, I'm left with no protection. That's my concern. So my law is only applicable to the no contact with the victim. All the other terms of their probation can be lifted, and this injunction can stay in place even if they're not on probation. So that's why it's so important.
See this?
Your law really puts the power back in the victim's hands.
Yes.
Because the victim could technically lift that or remove that if they wanted to, right?
Yes, okay. There is a clause in the law that allows a victim to opt out or not have it in place.
In the very rare scenario of a Romeo and Juliet situation, like you put it.
Yes.
If she wanted to, she could lift it.
Yes. Or if there's like a family situation, something like that. I am very confident in saying, speaking for most victims, they would want this law in place.
Well, it makes your very, very difficult choice of whether or not to go in front of the court so many years later and deal with him a lot easier if you're like, well, all right, maybe they'll lift his probation, but he still can't come anywhere near me. At the end of the day, I mean, that's the most important thing, I think, out of all this. Again, going back to what I said before, I just don't understand the opposition to this.
Yeah.
It's not like the person gets more prison or harsher punishment even. You just can't go near the person.
If anything, a judge could be more inclined to lift all the other terms of their probation knowing that this natural life injunction is in place.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
I don't know why there was so much opposition other than it's unfair. And then some people started to argue, well, if they get it lifted, and then what if they want to, own a gun? And I'm like, it doesn't, because you can't have a gun if you're on probation. Okay, well,
Sure.
Sex offenders are felons. They can't have a gun anyways. That's a whole having your civil liberties restored. People are so surface with it and they just don't understand this topic. And so for a system that doesn't want to re-traumatize and re-victimize, you'd think that they would be all on board with this. But unfortunately, politics do come into play and they shouldn't. And it's been kind of rough with the law. So
yeah,
we have had bipartisan support, if that means anything. Like a Republican governor in Arizona signed it into law, a Democrat governor in Wisconsin signed it into law. So there is bipartisan support with Kayleigh's law specifically, but there still is opposition. And it's funny to me that the most opposition comes from sex offenders themselves and their mommies. I don't know why. Why would they want to contact them? I don't understand. It's crazy to me.
Can a sex offender be rehabilitated?
No.
What kind of no type of sex offender of any sort can ever be rehabilitated.
What kind of examples?
Someone who peed in a...
Oh, we're gonna get into that.
There you go. Okay, yeah. Okay. Someone who have you ever read Out of the Darkness?
No.
You really should.
Okay.
It's an incredible story. It's more so to do with sexual addiction rather than specific sex offenders, but it's written from the standpoint of a person who struggled with voyeurism.
Okay.
The author, that was his thing. And he was rehabilitated over about 10 years. Went to jail, lost his family, got it back. This whole long story, I won't ruin it for you. But, he wasn't a sex offender, but by his own admission, could have become one. Like that.
Yeah.
Anytime he got caught.
So, like I said, there's no black and white. It's very complex. Peeing in public, it's hard enough to get an actual sex crime convicted. If someone's just urinating in public to prove that they were doing something else, it's so hard. So and then people assume public urination would be a level 1 sex offender. Mm-hmm. That's not at all. So to give you guys an example, in Arizona, and I'm only speaking specific to Arizona because it is different everywhere. Mm-hmm. In Arizona, you have an offender, they're charged, they're convicted and prosecuted, and then they get out, and whether they get out of, or whether they just do probation or get out of jail, whatever it may be, then they have their terms of what comes next. But once they're done with if they have jail or prison sentence, then they have a sex offender assessment. It's a generalized assessment. They use it for everything. It's a 19-question assessment. This is what determines a sex offender's risk level. Not the crime they were charged with, not what they were convicted of. This 19-question assessment.
Interesting. Wow. You've read it, I presume.
Oh, yes, I have it.
What kinds of questions are
things that have nothing to do with sex crimes.
Can you pull it up? Can he pull it up to see the 19 questions?
Yes.
What would he Google?
Oh, gosh. Google.
Arizona State?
Yeah, Google Arizona State sex offender...
questionnaire?
Risk assessment. Sex offender risk assessment. Look at that.
Offender registration.
No, it would be the risk assessment.
Looks like it's going to pop right up.
Okay.
Let's see.
Looks like 19 factors. Okay. Let's see that. Oh, okay.
I don't know if the questions will be on here though. There's the actual questionnaire you can pull up.
Oh, those right here? That's it. That's it.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Number of times, number of felony convictions, any sex-related arrests that did not lead to a conviction. So do they ask these questions of the offender?
No, this isn't it.
This isn't it.
No, that's not the questions.
Okay, those are the questions.
Or level 1 offender. See, and level 1 offenders are not I'm telling you, we talk about this all day long.
So a level 1 offender is somebody who got drunk and peed in a park.
No,
No.
that has nothing to do with it. So, I'm trying to think of where. Here it is. Arizonans for rational sex offender laws. This is the risk assessment.
Okay.
So
Let's see.
the question, like, there's
okay.
number of convictions. Go down to, like, I think it's 14. Let's see. I think I could be. Oh wait, go back up. Sorry, it's not. Maybe it's up. So this is one of the questions. Up a little more. Sorry. Right there. So, the gender of the victim. If they sexually abuse a female, they get 0 points. If they sexually abuse a male, 3 points. Both genders, 5. So.
What?
So.
More points is bad, I assume.
Yes. So understand, like, in my guy is a level 1 sex offender, and he sexually abused a 12 and 13-year-old. And because I was a female, he got 0 points.
What in the world?
That's insane.
That's insane. So, why in the world is a female
because it's an ass backwards system. Because they're saying that if they sexually abuse a female, they're less likely to reoffend.
What percentage of victims are female versus male?
Well, they say 1 in 4 females, 1 in 6 males. So, I mean, females are far more.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like 60%.
Yeah.
So, and then if you sexually abuse a family member, I think that's the next question, you get 0 points.
Oh my gosh.
See? Wow.
What?
So okay, so there's so much confusion about this, right? So people assume like public urination would be level 1. No. You can have an offender that sexually abuses a child, and they can be it has dangerous crimes against children. Like they were convicted with dangerous crimes against children, and they can be a level 1 sex offender.
So if someone sexually abuses their daughter, they get 0 points. Because both of those fall
0 for family, 0 for female.
0 for female.
Yes.
I feel like that's the profile of whoever made this.
You think?
Seriously. That is seriously
I know. So this is where there's so much confusion, and it gets so frustrating because people are like, level 1 sex offenders are the lowest risk. No, you can have a level 1 sex offender who sexually abuses children and who was charged with dangerous crimes against a child, and they can be a level 1. And then, to make it worse, level 1 sex offenders are not on the public registry. So you can't even look them up. So your next door neighbors could be level 1 sex offenders, and you have no way of knowing because they're not on there.
Oh my goodness. So I'm still processing this. What then does make it onto that list? I mean, if I go to familywatchdog.org, who do I see?
Level 2 and level 3.
Level 2 and level 3.
Yes.
And what they have to have molested a stranger to get enough points type
and
of thing?
both a male and a female. So then too, like there are cases where there's public urination. I don't think that's really, like I said, it'd be really hard to get that convicted. But like if you had someone like, beaten off in public, like in front of a playground, and there's male and female like present, and they charge them with that, then they get 6 points because it's strangers, and then they would get 5 points because there's boys and girls. But they didn't even touch anybody. Exactly.
That seems wrong.
But they could be a level 2 or 3. And then you have like my guy who sexually abused me for 2 years, had all these charges, dangerous crimes against children, position of trust, and he's a level 1.
Position of trust is a big one. That was one I wanted to also touch on. I mean, there seems to be either a misunderstanding or just a blatant ignorance of the fact that if you're in a position of authority and you act this way toward there isn't any such thing as consent in that type of a situation.
No.
And that's number 9 here, says use of force. And either A, none, or B, threats of violence, physical force or violence, substantial, great bodily harm. I mean, if you are a predator going after a child and you're in a position of authority, you're not going to be able to apply any of these points to a child in that situation.
No. And what about the mental force? What about
how is it possible to do any of this with none? How does anyone fall into the category
you guys,
of
it's
none?
So bad. Like, and this is what Arizona bases the level of sex offenders is off of this assessment.
Also, isn't most like pedophiles, aren't they doing it to family members? Isn't it almost like always? Maybe not always.
But mostly people you know. So it's not always within
Friends
a
or
family.
family,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very more common that it's someone, you know, stranger danger is. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but like, what about the stigma of like, we were raised, stay away from the white man, someone could kidnap you and, you know, whatever. Yeah, that doesn't really happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, because it absolutely does. And I know someone that actually happened to. But that's so rare.
Yeah.
And that's where the media goes into the smaller percentages of things that are happening. Like the rare, the less common things is what I should say. Yeah. No one's talking about like what's happening right in front of their own eyes or in their backyard. And like, we can even go into the Sound of Freedom from that because,
Yeah.
So you saw the movie last night. What'd you think?
I did. I thought it was very heavy. It was very needed. And I stayed afterwards. I assume you did too, from the sort of the message from Jim and from the creators of the film and whatnot. And that I thought was the most, I mean, there were several points in the film that were very emotionally taxing and, you know, you're probably going to cry if you see it. But at the very end, when he kind of just off script talks about why they made it and throws the statistics at you and talks about the fact that it's not a topic that's really sort of discussed because it's not very fun. It's not a dinner time conversation topic that anyone wants to have.
Well, can I cut you off there?
Yeah.
There's two reasons it's not talked about mostly. And the first reason is because it makes people so uncomfortable because our brains are wired to protect us. And so we have a hard time comprehending that this can actually happen. Like you see these stories in the news and you're like, but how? And your brain almost like shuts off, right? Like you can't fathom or actually think about what's going on. And the second reason is because I would say 1 out of 3 times the person you're trying to have that conversation with has either been a victim themselves or someone very close to them has been victimized. And so they naturally react by shutting down. And so those are like the two main reasons why this topic is so hard to discuss. What's ironic is it's literally the most relatable topic.
Right. I mean, we all have either family members, nieces, kids, nephews. I mean, we all know somebody who, I mean, most of us know somebody who's a victim of abuse. Like you said, maybe not necessarily kidnapping, child slavery, but the other thing he did at the end was, you know, break it down from a worldwide like there's more slaves now than at the height of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
There's 40 million worldwide known trafficked kids or whatever.
Half of which are sex
slaves.
Yes.
And it included other things.
And more of them are children than not.
More than it was when slavery was legal.
Yeah.
There's more slaves now than there was then.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear a little bit from you about the cyclical nature of this type of crime. You know, it seems like a lot of times the offenders have experienced something in their past. Is that your experience with dealing with these type of offenders?
I actually don't think that's true.
Okay.
That's just I mean, I've worked with a lot of people like in this industry on all the sides. And I think that is probably one of the most common misconceptions is that these offenders were victimized themselves. And some of them were, again, not to downplay, like, it gets so hard because you have to be careful. Like, oh no, that doesn't happen. It absolutely does. The statistically,
and trauma does replicate trauma.
Yeah, statistically, I don't know, but I think that is more of a misconception than a reality.
Okay.
Do you base that purely on just your personal?
No, from people I've
relationships
worked with.
I mean, like
in the industry, people who even work with sex offenders, like just like they'll say, oh, it's so hard for a sex offender to get a job. No, it's not. It's hard for them to get a job around children. Yeah, like it's hard for them to get a job where they have boundaries and protocols in place. But like, go to the warehouse. There's tons of jobs. I mean, there's tons of jobs, that sex offenders can get. But yeah, it's hard for them to get a job when they're trying to circumvent and get a job where they should not be getting a job at. And then they make it out to be this thing like, well, we can't get a job. That's not true. You can get a job, or they try to get an apartment that's right next to a school. Like that again, why are you looking there? Go somewhere else. Like they do it to half of it. They do it to themselves. But I don't know why. I think a big part of the problem with people being sex offenders and violating children, or just being perpetrators, in a nutshell, is because they know there are little to no repercussions. And so the risk for them, they know they can get off the hook with a slap on the wrist. It's just not, they know they're not going to face a lot in most cases. So,
I mean, I mean, I would counter by saying I think if you, at least in my mind's eye, I mean, when I was younger, I mean, if ever there was a situation where I thought a person I'm talking to may be under, I mean, I was told very clearly, hey, man, you are not going to do very well in prison. And I think we can all probably agree it really, really sucks being caught doing this. And that's probably the primary reason why anybody would stop that behavior.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't think you think it most of the time is a slap on the wrist. I mean, if you get convicted of child porn or you get convicted of any of these things we've talked about and you go to prison, they kill you, they castrate you.
They don't, because they're protected now.
How so?
Sex offenders are segregated. They are not with the general population anymore because they were taking things into their own hands.
Is this a Arizona state
something? It's in a lot of prisons that they put them in their own pod area because they know what'll happen.
Interesting.
I mean, I only have the knowledge on this from, I have a mentor of mine does prison ministry outreach and stuff. And he's told me about what historically does happen to these. This is really the only subsect of criminals that if you end up in prison, you got a problem. You could have raped someone, murdered someone, robbed a bank, shot a cop, no one cares. But if you touch a kid, if you hurt a kid and you go to prison, they're probably going to kill you.
Yeah, especially, and so that's the thing too, is not all sex offenders are pedophiles, but all pedophiles are sex offenders.
Right. Okay, so give me an example of so a sex offender is somebody who, say, date rapes an of-age partner. Yeah,
commits a sex crime. A sex offender is someone who commits a sex crime.
Right.
A pedophile is someone who is attracted to or acts on a prepubescent child. Mm-hmm. And so that's what a pedophile is.
Right.
So it's usually 12 and under, or under 12 is the age, is the cutoff.
Yeah. Which is and that is another thing, back to the movie, that made a very, very clear distinction between, there is a big difference oftentimes between those two categories of people.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody who, makes a terrible decision and commits a sex crime is very different than someone who wants an 8 or a 9-year-old child goes to Tijuana and finds one.
Yeah.
I mean, that is different.
So, okay. And so where the movie was hard for me, I was looking at it from a totally different lens, right? So Tim Ballard is savage, badass. I've never worked with him directly, but I work with Victor Marx. I work with Jaco Bunez. I work with people who do the same things. Mm-hmm. And so you leave that movie, right? And you feel like this heavy weight of darkness. And again, we have a hard time comprehending and wrapping our minds around it. But then we're also leaving feeling inspired and motivated to now get involved. And now we're aware.
Yeah.
With that movie and that story it was miraculous, but people are just jumping on this trending bandwagon of I got to get in a boat and go overseas and save kids on a crazy, an island where I'm not supposed to be. No, why don't you open your eyes to what's literally happening right in your backyard? Mm-hmm. And people don't want to do that because then it becomes real. Just like when you see a teacher arrested at a school, right? And even if you've seen the guy a few times or you know him, you're like, there's no way that could happen at my kid's school. It's safe. Nowhere is safe. Or at churches. And so people want to go to this. Oh, gosh, don't even get me started on churches.
Okay, ground it for me. I mean, all right, so I'm local. What is an example of a way that I don't have to go overseas in a boat and get onto an island? What is a way for an Arizona local to get involved here?
So I initially would say legislation. I mean, that's because that's where I have found that we can actually make impactful change. So awareness is huge, but awareness is nothing without action. It's just talk. And and this should not be just a thing of awareness. We need to make people that sex offender risk assessment, right? It's crazy. So to make people understand, okay, but now what are we going to do? So that's where I have found I just have this really, really strong pull towards policy and legislation because that's where we can create change that is implemented that actually affects the things that are going on.
Right.
So I understand not everyone wants to get involved in politics. I don't want to be in politics, you guys. This shouldn't even be political, but here we are. So in every state on that level, getting involved with politics, it can be really impactful. And there's all kinds of ways you can do, like through the RTS in Arizona, just showing where you stand on a bill, contacting legislators. I mean, look at what just happened in California. Did you guys see that with the 6 Democrats voting down? So there was a bill, SB 14, that would make the sex trafficking of a minor a felony. It's not in California. And 6 Democrats voted it down.
Misdemeanor?
Yeah,
Traffic
I saw
a
that.
child?
I saw that.
Yes.
What?
And 6 Democrats voted the bill down. And so what we do then by awareness is we let people know what's going on and who these elected officials are.
I saw you posted their pictures.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
I
yes.
love to do that.
That's great. No, I think that's outstanding. It's so much
go
more.
back up or go. It's the.
Yeah, it was recent.
Oh, the one with the blue. The serious felony. Yeah, because I think people need to know who these. That's how you create awareness is you let people know who they are, and these
Bring them to light.
And hold them accountable. If you're an elected official and you vote something down or vote something through, your name's on that, buddy. You better be willing to have people post your face right behind it. What in the world is the motivation to shoot that down?
I don't know, but not only did I share their pictures, I put all their emails on there and their phone numbers. Yeah, here they are.
Oh,
Lovely
sweet.
humans.
Look at those great people.
That are, yeah. And then Liz Ortega, tweeted the next day that she made a mistake and she was, because they wanted to bring it back to the floor, and she voted no again. And I was like, oh my gosh, like people, they just don't understand. So yeah, I do. But so so in Arizona, that's one way is politics. There are other ways. So there are tons of established organizations, and and OUR is amazing. Again, you have to be careful what you say. I am not knocking them, downplaying, nothing. They are incredible. Yeah. But there are other organizations, and that's why Tim Ballard left, and he's starting, what's it called? The Spear, I think is what he's calling it. Another organization.
He has his own organization?
I don't even think it's an organization, because you have to be careful, because this stuff is political now, unfortunately. And so you can't operate under a 501c3. Because you can't do anything political under a C3 organization. Okay. So you either have to go under a C4, which doesn't make much sense in this area, or you have to be more of like an LLC. But people like the C3 because it's tax, you don't have to pay taxes. It's a tax deduction if you donate. So he's starting something else called the Spear, where he can pour money into different organizations, not just OUR, because he said there are so many other organizations that are equipped to deal with certain things. OUR is not always the right organization.
What does OUR stand for?
Operation Underground Railroad. I had to think about that.
Yeah.
So, or people call it our, whatever they call it. But no, they're not always going to be the best equipped. They are amazing. Again, this isn't me bad mouthing them, but in Arizona, we have the Dream Center, which is great. And they get people out of sex trafficking. It's their Dream City Church, and they get them back into the real world. They help them, because that's the other thing too, is people are forgetting. And that's where I watched that movie, and my heart is aching for Tim, and he's putting himself in danger, his family, he's missing his own. I mean, I have the chills because I'm just thinking about it so much differently. Right. And then people just see he's on this mission for this one girl but I can guarantee that if you sat down with him, more than that one girl, as miraculous and as amazing as it was, all those other kids that were left behind, it haunts him. It has to, because I can't imagine, And so,
that one guy at the beginning of the film, his partner, when he basically confided in him, said, I don't think I can do this job. I just don't think I can physically do this.
Yeah. And that's everywhere. And people forget that part of it, the reality part, because our brains are wired to protect us. And so, anyways, there's different organizations, but people also forget about what comes next. And that's where with policy and focusing on the later trauma, right? So with my law, it came later. What about the stuff that's happening after? What about after they're rescued? Yeah. Victims need immense help, very specific help. And so to find different organizations throughout, wherever you're located, that are established and have a good reputation for actually helping victims, that's another way you can help. Some people just want to throw money, and that's great too. Every piece of the puzzle is just as important. Yeah. Just look at where you're sending money to and make sure that whoever you're giving money to is actually that there's accountability with what they're doing. They're not just taking your money, but I'm not big on walks or marches because that's not doing anything. There's way.
Amen to that. Man, other than just getting you out on television and people are kind of, I don't care what you're marching for. If you're out there marching, I'm just like, dude, you got to be doing something better with your time. There's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah,
than the way
and
you're
it's
doing
for awareness, but awareness is nothing without action.
it. To the topic of the victim recovery and, getting the help after the fact is, I think often everyone is so obsessed with catching the perpetrators that even then you kind of forget about what happens and the long-term help that a lot of these victims will require from that type of abuse. It's such a specific type of abuse. It's a good story, what you actually sent me yesterday. Did you ever hear the story of the Alaskan Avenger?
No, maybe.
You hear about this guy? In a nutshell, this is ongoing right now. It's kind of a crazy story. He and his stepbrother, the guy was like 30 when he started doing this, but when he was a boy, he and his brother were both abused by their stepfather. Time went on. He never saw therapy, never got treatment, never did any of this. Neither did his brother. He basically snapped and had a mental breakdown when he was about 30, went on to the Alaskan registered sex offender list, started finding these perpetrators, and started breaking into their homes and like almost beating them to death
with a hammer.
And he did this like 5 or 6 different times, I believe. Then he got caught. And the circumstances surrounding this case are obviously very contentious in both directions.
Yeah.
We can't have people breaking into anyone's house with a hammer for no reason. But at the same time, when he was arrested and when he was convicted, I believe he got 5 years, I believe. Luckily for him, none of his victims actually died. I think one was in a coma or something. But he got his 5 years. And while he was in there, there was a whole petition that his brother set up basically saying, my brother deserves to go to prison, but he needs to get help. That's why he did this.
Yeah.
He never got help. He never got treatment.
And with that, who gets the most help at the end of the day?
I'm going to say it's probably the offender.
Absolutely. They have endless resources. They're required to go to treatment. I think they pay like $60 a month or something like for their treatment. And then they have to have like their polygraphs and stuff. But like they're followed so closely and there's endless resources for them. And what do victims have? Like literally nothing. Like victims advocates, they are like everyone else. They're shorthanded, but they have their next case and the next case. And it just, you know what I mean? So like victims are literally, they're left in the dust and they are forgotten about every single day. And then there's the later trauma that comes like this guy. I mean, like for me, it was 15 years later and I was completely blindsided. I hadn't even thought about it. Like it like turned, like I put that file in the bottom of the drawer and never pulled it back out. Like, and then it's like everything resurfaces and then you start to realize how many things that like I didn't deal with. And I'm very healthy and like I was able to get through everything. And like I have, you know, like I said, my 5 kids, got a college degree, like I'm okay, but so many others aren't. So they're not getting the help that they need, or it costs a freaking shit ton of money to get help. Like, why don't we have more resources for victims and their families? Yeah. Like when I turned my guy in, not even a year later, my dad left. I mean, and my family completely fell apart. And I carry the weight of that. I feel like
these not a coincidence. Were these events tied in some way?
I don't know how they couldn't be. I mean, the stress, and I look at my parents now, and my parents did everything right in the moment. I am not knocking them. They did everything. They had my best interest in heart. They did everything right, but they had no one. They had, even looking back at the plea agreement, like why was that ever accepted? Like we never should have accepted it, but they didn't know any better, but we didn't have anybody helping us. And so then I can't imagine the stress as individuals, as parents, right? And then as a couple, and then my younger siblings who were affected by this, like our family, we had nothing. And I do believe it's gotten better. I will say that. I mean, from almost 20 years ago when I went through everything, but there are not enough resources for victims and their families. And that's where we have problems. And that's where people turn to things to cope and get through it.
Or become abusers themselves.
Yeah.
And that's probably the worst case scenario from something like this. Like you said earlier, is that it becomes a cycle, you know, hurting people, and so on and so forth. It keeps going. Sorry, buddy. Go ahead.
To me, the nature of this crime is extremely difficult to prosecute because you have a lot of times a minor's word against a adult who has, in a lot of instances, covered their tracks or is manipulative. But aside from the offender, what is the best way, in your opinion, to go after people in positions of authority who have allowed this to happen, who have brushed it under the rug, who maybe have just relocated the offender to a different place?
Policy, legislation, bills. And I can tell you, I had spearheaded 4 bills this last session, and the governor, she vetoed 2 of them. One of them failed in committee, and the other one she did sign, which was actually just amendments to my law, so a judge couldn't seal or set aside an injunction. But they know the loopholes. That's where I said the circle jerk. It's one big circle jerk that they, looks like you're doing your part, I'm doing my part, we'll meet in the middle and call it good. It's very rare you even see sex crimes go to trial anymore, because they're just settling.
You say anymore. Was there a time when they were?
I believe so, yeah.
When? Why?
I believe, I don't know when. I do believe somewhere, I would say in Arizona, and I've been told within the last 5 to 10 years, things kind of shifted where the system was very pro-victim, and now it's very pro-perpetrator. There's more concern for the perpetrator than there is for the victim.
In the last 5 to 10 years?
Yes.
Well, there was an interesting statistic brought up in the film, again, Sound of Freedom, where he talks about the fact that, I think he said child pornography has gone up 5,000% in the last 1 to 2 years or something along that. I mean, it doesn't seem like a weird coincidence that these types of things are happening simultaneously. Well, I mean, what's going? Why? What is so miraculous and special about the last 5 years? I mean,
accessibility. People have more access. I mean, to the internet, there's endless things, right? So it's easier and it's more accessible than it's ever been. Also, the laws are catching up with technology in every way. There's just not there are not a lot of laws in place. I mean, there is for child porn, obviously.
The laws aren't catching up to technology, or they are?
They are.
Okay, how?
We're just playing catch up. So like,
oh, I see what you're saying. They're trying to catch up.
When laws were drafted, 10, 20 years ago, but so that's where there are loopholes. So like, if there was a law where like you can't look at a picture of like child porn, you could have someone who, but prior to like the internet, when the internet just started and like there was child porn on the internet, they could say, well, the law said like a picture, this is on the internet. They find the loopholes. That's what defense attorneys for sex offenders do, is they find loopholes. And I will say this, I believe with every part of me, there are bills drafted that look good, but are ultimately created to create a loophole in the system for the bad guys. And it's by good people. They just create these laws to create loopholes.
You sort of there at the end of what you just said somewhat answered what I was going to ask. You get this feeling, at least I do. The market for this is growing. A large percentage of it is in the United States. Seems like this problem is getting a little bit bigger, more common. And I don't mean to go into the conspiracy theory realm or I mean, look, we all know Epstein, who apparently is alive. Did you see this? Am I the only one in this room that knows this? Whatever. May or may not be alive.
He's not going to do conspiracy theory.
He did not kill himself, but moving on.
Doesn't matter. I mean, you have a narrative that some people, and I include myself in this, that there are a certain percentage of very, very high, prominent, powerful leaders, political and otherwise, that want to see. I mean, this industry makes more than they say it's going to pass the drug trade.
Yeah.
Someone's making that money.
50 billion? Was it 50 billion?
Someone's making that money.
And what they said in the movie was you can only sell a bag of Coke one time, but you can sell a kid. Oh, it gives me the chills. You can sell a kid 10 times in a day.
For 10 years.
Yeah.
If you start her or him at 6 years old, they will meet that market target until they're 16 or 17 years old.
Yeah.
So there is definitely very, very powerful people wanting this to not go away and wanting it to grow.
Why? There's a reason those officials in California voted against making the trafficking of minors a felony. Mm-hmm. Like, who are you covering for? And those are the questions I ask. And I will approach our legislators here in Arizona and be like, who are you covering for? Why you vote no against this? Mm-hmm. Like, and they just look at you.
It's a very simple question. I mean, it should not be a bipartisan issue. Democrats love their kids too. There's no...
Exactly. But they will fight till the death because of whatever reason, or their party line told them to. And this, protecting kids should not be a political issue, but here we are. And so that's where it's frustrating. Like, I don't want to get in politics. I'm sorry, but this has become political. And this is not a matter of, I mean, they're making it a matter of left and right. This is a matter of right and wrong. Like, you're either protecting kids or you're not. Like, there's no in between here at all.
Yeah.
It seems to me like the foster system is rife with these types of abuses. Are there any simple changes, perhaps to legislation or anything, that could clean this up at all?
Oh, I wish that was an easier answer. I mean, like, not to go down the conspiracy theory thing, but if they have kids in foster care and then they have money and they get, you know what I mean? Like, it just is endless. Like, it's so, there is no, we're never going to fix it all. And that's where I struggle, because I know we're never going to be bulletproof, but we can narrow the gaps. And that's my goal. And my goal is to create, tighter policy and tighter laws so that we can narrow the gaps and have this be a better world than not. Yeah. But for foster care, I mean, I think there's absolutely bills that can change. And I think we need more policy and laws for prosecutors and judges, like, where they can't, like, for example, if you have someone who has been charged and there's like evidence that they sexually abused a minor, why are we letting them? Why is it legally allowed that they're allowed to plea down to like an attempt?
Right.
Why are we doing that? Like, or why don't we have a minimum? Like, if you sexually abuse a minor, like, you're, whatever the definition of minor is, that's different in every state.
Sure.
But you're serving a minimum of 5 years in prison, like, period. Why don't we have that? And we had a bill this last session, and actually it was a strike everything. Do you know what that is?
No.
So you could take like SB 1234, and you could have all the language in it about watering trees or plants, whatever, and then you could have them come in and they'll strike out all the verbiage and reinsert new language. It's called a strike everything. There's some strategy in it. I did a strike everything this session, and it worked for me a little bit. But so the bill sponsor with the minimum, he had a bill that was to do a minimum of a year in prison if you commit a sex crime against a minor. But he was very specific. He included sex crimes. So that's what I do with my bills, is I include like the ARS codes. Otherwise, it's just up for whatever interpretation, right? It's just a suggestion. And if you don't have consequences in your bills either, it's simply a suggestion, right? Like, we have to have things laid out. Anyways, he did a strike everything.
I also don't think it should be right that if you commit a crime against a child, you're convicted, you go to prison. I don't believe you should be allowed to go into solitary confinement. I know that isn't exactly, but I don't think that should.
They're protected. Pedophiles are the most protected criminals in the world. They are the most protected criminals. It's insane to me.
It doesn't make sense to me.
I know.
It's also, I think, one of the, I can't remember if it was you who just touched on this or not. It seems like it's like, I feel like I could be rehabbed if I robbed a bank. Like, I could. Maybe I was in a really shitty place and I just made a bad decision. When you are dealing with, because there's a whole psychology of things going on with somebody who has gotten to that place where they are, I mean, forget even if they never acted. I mean, if you are experiencing sexual gratification from underage, from children, I agree with you on that. I don't think, because you have this interwoven connection of now sexual desire with this crime, I don't think that can be changed. No. I don't think you can reverse engineer your mind like that.
And, well, I'm very big on like words. So like, whether you robbed a bank and it was a mistake. No, I mean, it was a choice, but I believe you can get help.
You don't believe you can make a mistake?
No, people make mistakes every day. But if you're going in to rob a bank,
I think a choice and a mistake are both simultaneous. I
made a fucked up choice. That's what it is.
Sure. Yeah.
But a mistake is turning the wrong way on a road. I don't know. I struggle with that though. But anyways,
that's
with
still a choice.
Sex offender, you
did.
Yeah, I know.
It's one and the same. I mean, we're starting to sound like attorneys in here. It is the same, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, but okay. So for sex offenders or pedophiles, we'll stick with pedophiles, right?
Sure.
Your everything you do is so calculated. Mm-hmm. From if you pull up like sexual grooming, I mean, you target your victim. You isolate them, you manipulate those around you. Like, you put in overtime, and everything you do is so calculated to get that victim exactly where you want them to be. and the community. So then what happens? Like, look, in my case, he groomed the entire community, and it's in all his paperwork, the extensive grooming, the efforts he put in. And what do all these people do? He would never. Like, I know him. I would leave all my children with him. Like, it's so calculated and it's so intentional. Those are not mistakes. Those...
Dr. Nasser, the gymnast,
Olympic coach,
the
coach that guy,
Olympic gymnast.
Yeah.
So they find these positions, these pockets where they're going to be exposed to children, and they exploit them, and then they groom the community, not just the children.
Absolutely.
Is it true that a lot of times sex offenders look at the father of a family and pick out weak fathers to find out who their victims are going to be?
I'm not saying that's not true, because I believe it is. I think they look for a weak system, a weak dynamic, if you will. So,
divorce, separation, something in the family that's not correct, that type of thing.
Yes, where there's brokenness and not a foundation. So, I mean, say you have, like, for example, a guy who is a greeter at a church, right? And actually, he could even be a sex offender. And again, like I said, church is a whole other thing. But if they're not running a background check, and you have this guy greeting people at the door, right? And he's there every Sunday, and he's sex offender, whoever you think is not a sex offender, like in a group, they are the most clean cut. I mean, it's insane. Like
Sure. Yeah.
They work overtime to present themselves in a good way. But like, say you have this guy at church, right? And he intentionally picked that position so he could see who's coming. Okay. Right. So then you have, mom, daughter, and son. And then he realizes, okay, there's never a dad. And then, like, hello, how are you? And then he gets to know their names, like, hey, Molly, whatever. And it's just like every weekend, next thing you know, he's like, oh, there's their car. And I mean, everything is so strategic. And then everyone at the church knows this guy because he's great and he greets us every Sunday. And then you find out 2 years later he's sexually abusing Molly's daughter and son, and they're like, he would never. Like, I saw him he was at church every Sunday. He was always so nice, his hair was always cut, he smelled good. And it's like,
who was just saying that Joel Osteen's organization was just linked to child trafficking? I just saw that.
I haven't seen that, but
I just saw that. Can you? Well, never mind.
No, that was just a video that someone made a claim.
Yeah. Is that all that was? It's something.
Someone stood up and said his name. That was pretty much
okay. Well, then maybe that's not. Yeah. That's not really substantiated.
Anecdotal.
Yeah.
I mean, churches are. They're
definitely, and they're also breeding grounds for people. I mean, look, we're all broken. I get that, but it's a place where, if I'm a single mom, I'm going to bring my kid.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you do. You think it's a safe place.
Yeah. Well, it should be, but most of them are not. So yeah. I don't remember how we got on that, but
we've been on it for a while. I mean, it's heavy stuff.
It is, but it's real, and that's what's so hard. And when I started this, I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I was doing it, and that's I think. Here, like, becoming the 1% or whatever, if you want to, like, going into that. I mean, I need people to understand, when I went and testified in court that day, I knew I had to do something. I didn't know what. I just knew I was going to do it. I didn't know how I was going to get there. I didn't know. And then they're like, you have to draft legislation. And I'm like, I have to do what? And they said, call your local official. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. And they're like, I didn't know. I didn't know what color went with what party, who was the donkey with, like, how many officials. I'm telling you guys, like, I'm serious. I didn't know, but I just did my homework. And then when we drafted the original bill, I was down there for everything. Like, I was there. It was important. And now I'm like, I went all the way down there for that. Like, that was dumb, but that's how important it was to me. Right. And so, and actually the night before I went, to court, someone in my family, I said, I have to go. I have to try, because if he gets off probation and I don't go, I will never forgive myself. But if I go and I try, at least I can lay my head down at night and say I tried. And this person said, do you know how stupid you sound? You're one person. You're never going to change anything. And now I sit here and I'm like, I am one person, and I did change something. And that's all it takes, is a spark to start a whole blaze. And I just hope that I can give that hope to people. You don't have to be someone of importance or someone who's well known to go in and make a difference. Like, you can make a difference at any level of this. And it's hard, but you can do it. And And so I just like, I do want to leave people with that hope that
Absolutely.
they can.
Yeah,
that
and
they can make a
your
difference.
story is super inspirational. What is next for you?
Oh gosh, I have no idea how much time you got. Well, getting Kayleigh's Law passed in all 50 states, that's
That should
huge.
occupy some time.
Yeah.
You got to go through California. That'll be fun.
Yeah, I mean, we're drafting next session, so there's a good window of opportunity with everything going on. And if you're gonna continue to protect the offenders, that's fine. We're gonna draft policy to protect the victims. Like at the end of the day.
It actually does. You mentioned that, especially with there's been a few things that have come out, especially in Hollywood recently, that seem to be bringing this to light quite aggressively. This seems like it's sort of in the air. At the very least, people are talking about it.
Yes.
So if you present Kayleigh's Law to a bunch of government officials and they all say no, well, then they're going to end up on your page and they're like, all right, they shut it down.
Yeah.
Here's what they said.
I had a county attorney in Arizona walk up to me at the Capitol and say about a bill, and he was like, "Hey, I know you're behind this," and it's funny, I wasn't. It wasn't even my bill, but I was honored that he thought I was. And it was that strike everything I'm talking about. And he's like, "I just have a problem with the language. Like, would you be willing to sit down and talk with me?" And I started laughing. I said, "That's not my bill." And he's like, "Okay, well, I don't want you to blast me on your Instagram." And I said, "Well, either you're working with me or against me. Like this, again, right or wrong. Like either you're protecting children or you're not." Oh, and that strike everything, that's what it was going to. I do want to say they reinserted a bill or inserted language because right now in the state of Arizona, prior to the strike everything, these sex dolls that are like that look like children, like the real life sex dolls.
What?
Yeah. Don't Google it.
Where is that?
Don't worry. Yeah, I'm not Googling it. Eli, this is your computer, right?
Don't do it.
I mean, is this being sold like openly in
Okay, so they're creating dolls that look
who?
nasty people. I don't
Oh,
know,
what
fucked
the-
up sick people
Wow.
that look like they're real. And so what's happened is you have police or detectives or whoever going into these perpetrators' houses or whatever, or they're making child porn with these dolls, but they look real. It's a thing, I'm telling you. But so what happens is they go in to arrest the guy because it looks like he's having sex with a 4-year-old and it's a doll, but it's so realistic. There is no laws to convict them under having sex with the doll.
Because they haven't actually touched anybody.
Exactly. But where do you draw that line? And so it's like when you have a doll that looks like a child and you're creating porn to profit, how long is that doll going to suffice before you go into the real thing? And we can't have that out. Like, and it's like, even with like the AI, you know what I'm saying? So like we had to draft policy, Representative Wynn.
But I mean, how far can you push into the personal lives of someone who hasn't broken the law?
I know,
Because
exactly.
Speaking on behalf of the interesting individual fucking the doll, he hasn't broken any laws. He hasn't touched a kid.
Exactly.
Maybe he hasn't even like actually done any child porn. 'Cause
Exactly.
that's not child porn,
Yeah.
technically speaking.
Yeah.
How far can you? I mean,
know.
okay, does he go to prison for buying the doll?
Yeah. Where are your rights? Like where personal life? I know.
Does he go to prison for writing a story about going to get the doll?
I know.
mean,
I know. So, but we did draft policy. I know. I'm with you. Where do you draw that line? And so we did draft policy in Arizona. The governor actually signed it, surprisingly. But it went through.
Our governor?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
I know.
Hobbs signed that?
I know. I don't know.
I would have thought she would have had one.
She vetoed mine and I got in trouble. Did you guys see all that?
No.
No.
Oh, you didn't.
You got in trouble for what? What does that mean?
Because I said I was disgusted. You didn't see this?
So you get in trouble for saying you're disgusted? Why? What
I
happens?
drafted a bill. So back to the sex offender registry and the levels of sex offenders. If you are level 2 or 3, you must notify the school in which the district you live. Not if you're level 1.
Which again allows me to have sex with my daughter and stay in the level 1. But yes, okay.
Yes.
Keep going.
Okay. So you.
That's the craziest thing you've told me today, by
I
the way.
know.
That's the craziest thing.
I showed you too.
That's
like
nuts.
It's real. So in Arizona, only a level 2 or level 3 sex offender has to notify the school in the district which they live. So people think it's all sex offenders. No, it's only level 2 and level 3.
Do they actually, is there ever a situation where they have to go door to door and tell their neighbors that they're living there?
So level 3, the sheriff's office is supposed to notify everyone within a 1 mile distance.
So it's no longer the offender; it's the sheriff's office.
Yes.
Okay.
At one point, it was the offender.
Yeah.
I remember,
Yeah.
because that's what sparked that hilarious scene in The Big Lebowski. Remember where he had to go door to door and tell
Yes.
everybody?
And they should make them do that.
Oh,
That public
100%.
shame. Like, yeah, like they should be doing that.
Can you imagine the greetings you would get? You go around as a solar panel salesman. You get some color enforcement. Imagine if you had to go up there and say you're a level 3 sex offender. What people would say. What I would say. Oh my goodness. Oh, like, Alfie.
Yeah, I mean, like, what? Yeah, no. Now it's the sheriff's office because I'm sure someone,
Complain.
yeah, and got to protect the offenders. So, anyways, I drafted a bill that would require a sex offender with parental rights to notify their children's school of their sex offender status.
Oh.
Why did I do this? Because my offenders' kids were going to the school that I intended to send my kids to for high school. And I found out through Facebook that they went to this school. And so I went and I confronted the school and said, hey, I just want to make sure you know this is what's going on. This guy is a registered sex offender. And like, I gave them everything that they needed. And they were mortified. They're like, why were we not notified that this guy is a sex offender? Well, like nowhere in their paperwork did they ask that question. Like as a parent, in the household, an offender or something like that, like they didn't, because why would they think that they have to do that? They thought that they would be notified. No, it's only the district in which a level 2 or 3 offender lives. So I drafted SB 1253, which would have required a registered sex offender with parental rights to notify their children's school of their status.
With parental rights, meaning if your father was a sex offender and your mother, they got divorced and he's not in your life, he doesn't have to call your school and say that he's your father, does he?
If he doesn't have parental rights, no. Because we have to narrow it, right? So like I would like it way more broad, but we have to have a starting point somewhere. So like I think it should be.
But you also have to think about things from the terms of those kids too. I mean, the children of a sex offender are not sex offenders. I mean, what's it going to be like for them when someone calls the school and says, "Oh, their parents are sex offenders"?
Listen, I empathize with the kids whose parents are sex offenders. I'm not negating that. However, as a school where there's children, if you have a sex offender, your top priority is protecting those children. And you have to think about an offender who's coming in. And if they don't know who that guy is, they can't keep the kids on that school safe. And we're not saying they have to blast it on a billboard. We're not saying anything like that. It was that the administrative staff had to be made aware so they can keep the kids on their campus safe. Now, an offender's smart. They're not going to go and volunteer to sign up for, the field trip because they know they're not going to pass. What are they going to do? They're going to come to the carnivals. They're going to come to the concerts or the programs because they know they can get in.
Yeah.
Because there's no background check for that. They're going to show up at
Usually
field trips.
It's open. There'll be an open format,
Yes.
like if you have a big movie or event
Yes.
at the school. Yeah.
But they're going to go on field trips, not as a chaperone, but they'll meet them there. Here's the other problem is if the school doesn't know and they're passing out birthday invitations for this kid, and now you have 4 kids from Molly's class that are now going to this sex offender's house where they're not supposed to be, our priority has to be protecting the vast majority. And I don't want the children of the offender to be targeted, bullied. That would be that would be horrible. But we have to be.
How do you then? I mean, how in the world would you stop that from happening? It does not seem like you're going to be able to get both what you want and what you just said.
We're never going to be bulletproof, but we can narrow the gaps.
Right. And I mean, a sex offender should not be allowed to go anywhere near a school.
No.
Under any circumstance.
No.
I mean, they shouldn't be able to drop off, go to functions, go to games, anything like that.
Have people over for a birthday party.
No, I mean, sure, but you can't stop adults from doing things. If the sex offender wants to throw a birthday party for their kid, the sex offender is not required to tell all the kids' parents that I am a sex offender, you're coming to my house.
Actually, if they're on probation, they have to notify every single person. There's a permission slip for every single person that has to.
If they're on probation.
If they're on probation. If they're
Okay.
not, that's a whole other issue.
If they're not on probation, which most aren't, most sex offenders wouldn't be if they've been convicted, they've done their time. I mean, how long does a probation period last if you're a level 2?
In Arizona, I'd say 7 to 10 years. It just depends.
Wow, that is a long time, actually.
Because they're getting off, but these guys have these lifetime probation. I get what you're saying. It is sticky, but at the end of the day, our top priority has to be protecting the children on the campus. And so if the administrative staff is made aware, then they can take what precautions they need to keep this offender away from the kids. And so I drafted this bill. It went through. It was a partisan bill, which was very frustrating because I didn't understand why.
I assume Republicans are somehow more on board with this.
Yes, none of the Democrats are.
Why?
It's so frustrating. I don't know.
I mean, again, some of this stuff is sticky. Some of this is, again, the sex doll thing is, I get why that would be a partisan issue. But I don't think protecting kids from offenders or just the parameters of your law.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense to me unless you are a pedophile.
Offender,
yeah, that's the only way that makes sense not to want your law.
You're protecting pedophiles.
Who would protect pedophiles other than a pedophile?
Someone who had corporate donors that
he knew were pedophiles, or
maybe they don't even know. Maybe it's just a direction that comes down from their corporate donors. Maybe they don't know that they're in bed with people that are pedophiles.
Yeah, I think that is another big part of it too, is who their donors are, and they tell them which way to go and what to vote with and who to vote against. But yeah, so that bill, the governor vetoed it, and I never get on Twitter. And I tweeted, actually, if you scroll down on my Instagram page, you can see it. Go to, let's see, go down to, I'll tell you when, right, hold on. Right there. Governor Katie Hobbs prioritizes protecting pedophiles over protecting children in schools. So I shared that, and I put the same thing on Twitter, that picture, and I tweeted that she has officially vetoed SB 1253. I am disgusted. Thank you, Senator Shamp, for sponsoring this bill on Twitter. 3 days later, I got a phone call from Maricopa County Attorney's Office informing me that because I spoke out in opposition and against our elected officials, that they were revoking my speaking engagement offer that they had given me in January for National Victims of Crimes Week, and they revoked my national award that I was supposed to be receiving in April. So
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
I know.
I mean, there is so much. It's like an incumbent president. There is so much on their side of the board. I mean, you're right to speak. It is a right. It's not a privilege, but to them, it's much, much more of a privilege that they believe they can give and take away from you. And oftentimes, I mean, they can. Yeah, your civil liberties were just violated because you spoke your opinion. There should never be
my First Amendment rights were violated.
Yeah,
like
it's why I hate censorship in all forms. I mean, I want to hear. I would sit down with a pedophile and listen to his crazy shit. I mean, I want to.
I would too, because anybody. Absolutely. So yeah, I tweeted that, and if you scroll up, like when
was this? When did that tweet happen?
What was it? April.
Was that the extent of what they basically did? They took away your speaking engagements?
Oh yeah, and then they.
I suppose what else really could they do? I mean, they can't stop you from.
And she killed my other bills, or she vetoed them.
Sure.
But if you go up, I mean, it was on national news. It was on. I was devastated. I just couldn't believe of all the bills. That's what she vetoed. But there was a lot. I was on a couple radio stations, national news,
talking about it.
Yeah, because they wanted to know, like why. I mean, for National Victims of Crimes Rights Week, and I have done all this stuff, like, and they were honoring me for my efforts, and then they. Did that.
Not to end on possibly the most controversial topic of the entire day, but I want to know what you think about this. As we sit here in 2023, there is currently a movement to basically allow pedophilia as a accepted sexual class, the same way we've seen other groups become accepted.
Yeah.
Where do you see this coming from? And, I mean, do you ever see that passing? Or becoming an accepted group of society the way that certain people want? It's
terrifying. Could I see it happening? Unfortunately, with this fucked up ass backwards world, yeah, I could see it happening, and it is very scary. What I think is going on is there's a bigger agenda here, right? Like, I mean, not to go off topic, but even with this child mutilation, and like, children are not old enough to make decisions. Like you cannot take your kid legally right now and get a tattoo or a piercing, but you can take your 4-year-old and have his penis cut off because he thinks he's a girl, you know, or give him hormone, whatever. But what I think is happening, or like these drag shows, right? That is a form of grooming. That is, and what they're doing is they're conditioning society to become numb to these things.
They were born this way.
Yes. And so what's happening is they're putting it, like the media controls the mind. And so they're putting it so out there and in our face when 2 years ago, these guys would have been thrown in jail and convicted of something. But now they're making normal people feel like they're crazy for not accepting these behaviors because they're conditioning us to accept them as normal, and they are not normal.
And what about a pedophile identifying as a child to be closer to children? Like, I mean, it's a very slippery slope.
It's a ridiculous
sentence
you just said, but it's literally where we're at.
Yes.
If anybody can identify as anything based on how I feel, then that is a very, very reasonable argument.
It is. And they're doing that. We, in our world, society, or not, I'm sorry, in our society, in our world, accountability is out the window. So before, like, what happened to like even like being bipolar? Like, if you had thought you're like multiple personality disorder, you know what I'm saying? Like, you were considered to have an illness, but now they're like, you want to have sex with kids and like that's normal. Like, no, it's not. There's no accountability. And I think a lot of it goes back to the money in the industry. You can sell a bag of Coke once, sell a kid 10 times. And if they can condition society to become more numb to these things and they appear normal,
market gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And we're not going to fight back because we feel like we can't, or yeah, that's just how it is. It is what it is. Like, there's nothing we can do.
Or you've been censored and you've been ridiculed and you've been shut up from fighting back.
You can't talk about these things. If you have a public platform, we'll demonetize you.
I was shadow banned for the first time last week.
Really?
Yeah.
On what platform?
On Instagram. I think.
How do you know?
Because my stories went from 10,000 views to 100.
Wow.
And I was like,
what did you do? I mean, do you know what the topic was?
I think I was posting all that stuff about California, and I used too many, because I try to mix it up a little bit, because I know, like, and I think I just posted too much too quick. And so I was like, I'm totally being shadow banned. And then I posted me in the pool in a bikini, and my stories went right back up to 5,000. I was like, okay.
Good for you.
Like, I get it. This is what it takes, but crazy. So, yeah, I do think, I don't think they're going to stop. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Yeah. And I think that we have to try to get ahead of it. And that's through policy, you know, and holding these people accountable. And that's going to take a lot of bravery. That's going to take a lot of boldness and accountability.
Yeah. I have to ask, do you have any career political ambitions?
God, I don't know. People ask me to run all the time. If that's where God calls me, listen, he'll pave the way. I don't think right now. I thought about it. We'll see. I don't know.
It's such a daunting future thought. Like, when I think about doing that full time forever, or nothing's forever, but you get what I'm saying. It seems like once you're a politician, you're a politician. Like,
yeah, well, and people don't like politicians.
No,
I know why. And so not that I don't want to be in that fight, but if I am very also where I would have a hard time is I am so in my lane of what I want to change, which is everything that I'm doing.
Which is why you've been able to change it.
And I love the policy of it. Like, I never thought I would, but I love doing the policy side of it. And I love going down to the Capitol and going full savage and like not holding back.
That's awesome.
I'm down there.
Awesome.
They know why I'm there. And I love it. And now the sex offenders come in opposition. I'm going to share a video. I'll probably do it this week of the sex offender who got up there and was like, poor me, like in front of our legislators. And he said what he did. And then you go look him up and he's got 43 counts. And it's like,
the balls.
I know.
I wouldn't go up in front of anyone and ever. What the hell?
I know.
Oh, no.
So yeah, then if I'm in, a political position, then I have to worry about other things. And not that they don't matter, but I believe if we all stepped into our own purpose instead of trying to step into others, our world would be so much better off. We could be so much more accomplished in so many things if we would step into our own purpose and stay in it. And so I do believe that my purpose and my calling is what I'm doing. And I don't want to stray from that. And I don't want to be distracted by other things. So if I can continue to draft policy and partner with legislators across the nation, that would be my ultimate goal versus taking an actual political seat.
That's awesome. Kayleigh.
Awesome.
Well, thank you again for everything you're doing. I mean, it's enormously important. I'm so happy to see that you're actually making a difference.
Yeah.
And if somebody wanted to get involved with something you're doing, where do they go?
My website, becauseyoustillmatter.com.
Okay.
And that's why I'm doing everything I'm doing. I am fighting for you because you still matter. And I need victims and survivors to hear that's why I'm fighting for you.
Amen.
Obviously Instagram, I share a lot. My TikTok's picking up. So
There you go.
and you know what, you guys, I mean, I have a love-hate with social media. I just did a 6-week hiatus off, but it's hard because that is where you get information out on. But I'm also
everything.
I'm a doer. And so I'm taking care of my 5 kids and working out and doing all these things. And so I do the social media part of it, but that's where I share a lot of information, obviously, is on there. So
Thanks for coming on. Super inspirational. You're at the tip of the spear with this, and any support, let people know. They can go to becauseyoustillmatter.com, check out the website, get behind Kayleigh's law and all of the things that she has going on. But thanks again for coming in.
yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll cut it there, bud. Thank you guys so much for watching that episode of Becoming the 1% podcast. If you like the content and you want to see more of it, hit the like and subscribe. Activate that notification bell as well. We really appreciate it. If you guys want to see more of it, we actually have the Becoming the 1% Instagram, and the podcast is available on Spotify. For our socials, we have Strict Vision Athletics on Instagram, we have it on YouTube, and we have it on TikTok.